Over 7 million different animals inhabit our planet.
Moving, and they're moving quickly towards getting money and getting help and getting Australia, the people, the animals, the land, the aid that it needs.
What can they teach us?
This one, oh my God, Angie, this thing is the cutest thing on earth. The mountain pygmy possum. Critically endangered, less than 2,000, smack dab in the burn area. Smack dab.
Many species are in crisis and need your help. Join the movement at allcreaturespod.com.
Welcome to the All Creatures Podcast. This is Chris.
And I'm Angie.
It's a different one, Angie. This is a very different episode.
That's, I guess, one way to describe it.
Well, we've done conservation news in the past, but this is just a focus on an emerging crisis. Like it's the world's talking about it. I think it was something that you and I discussed that we thought we would deserve a special episode just on what's going on down under in Australia.
Yeah, the Australian bushfires of 2019 and now into 2020 are historic and horrific and definitely something I don't even think I can relate to. And as a lot of the media started circulating here in the US a couple weeks ago, and definitely within the last 10 days since the new year, it was very devastating. And I didn't really know how to respond. And talking with you, of course, and several of my animal colleagues, my husband, our friends, it just seems so devastating and almost paralyzing, I think, for me, for at least initially, just reading lots of articles and trying to wrap my brain around what was happening to the wildlife and to the people in Australia, and just trying to wrap my brain around it and going into kind of a deep, dark place of feeling very helpless. And that's why I think when you, of course, you're always full of genius ideas. That's why you're a great podcast partner. When you suggested we do this, my gut instinct was like, no, I don't even know. What do we, it's just horrific. It's just horrible. I just want to curl up in a ball. But there is a lot of hope out there. And once
absolutely,
I started looking at a lot of the data and the scientific evidence and seeing what amazing people the global community is doing to help this crisis, is why we're here today and why we want to share with you, yes, some staggering statistics about animals. This podcast is going to focus mostly on the animals because that's what we do and that's what we specialize in. But in the same instance, it will hopefully give you some hope, and you'll come away from this podcast with some resources of what you, the listener, can do.
Right.
It's reasonable and within your reach.
Right. I mean, that was perfect because if you don't live in Australia, and I know we have a very good listenership down there, and we really want to dedicate this special episode to you, you do feel helpless. And, living in California or growing up in California and then coming home, just last fall for us, we had some fires up and around LA, and I saw the smoke and breathing the smoke and smelling it. And those were tiny little insignificant fires, even though they disrupted and burnt down some homes, which is horrible, but compared to what's going on down in Australia.
Yeah.
So I just felt compelled that we had to talk about this. We have to talk about it. And I think, with this podcast, like you said, give facts. We're two scientists. This is the data. And then really look at how it's impacting the species there, because that's what we care about most, right?
And also, too, I don't want people to be in that dark, paralyzing type place where you just feel like it's hopeless. There is a lot that you can do. And so I want to open just briefly. We'll talk more throughout the podcast of some really hopeful stories we're going to touch on and what's going on, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But the good is that people are moving, and they're moving quickly towards getting money and getting help and getting Australia, the people, the animals, the land, the aid that it needs. And so first, I want to give a big shout out to some of our conservation network heroes and partners that we work with on a frequent basis here at All Creatures Podcast. First and foremost, I want to give a huge shout out to the San Diego Zoo and Chris's neighborhood. He gets to work with them a lot. They are donating a lot of money to help fight this battle, a lot of their proceeds, and doing fundraisers and amazing things like that. And in fact, I highly recommend that you check out your local AZA accredited facility or zoo or aquarium, because so many of them are mobilizing to help Australia. We'll put a link on our show notes that will help you locate your local AZA accredited facility, and you can see what's going on, how just maybe you even going to the zoo that day helps, or maybe there's an extra fundraiser or 5K, or there's just everybody's getting really creative with how to help raise money. And so there's just there's too many zoos to mention, unfortunately, but they're doing a lot of great things. Another amazing group we've worked with, Peppermint Narwhal, 15% of their profits this quarter, so not even this month, whatever, this quarter, are going to help animal organizations down in Australia get the relief they need. And then a huge partnership that we love to work with, Global Wildlife Conservation. They're incredible. They've teamed with Earth Alliance, which is created by my darling, who doesn't know that he's my darling, nor does he care.
He will one
my
day.
Conservation crush, Leonardo, which my husband fully supports and approves. You're allowed to have conservation crushes. It's healthy and normal, I swear. But we got to make it fun, right? Earth Alliance, which is created by Leonardo DiCaprio in 2019, a $3 million commitment to getting critical firefighting efforts underway in New South Wales and assisting in wildlife rescue and support, long-term restoration, which Chris and I will be talking about, some of the science behind that. And they have other several partners that they work with, including Aussie Ark, Bush Heritage, and of course, Global Wildlife Conservation. So you can find more information about that at hashtag Australia Wildfire Fund, or similarly, AustraliaWildfireFund.com. Wow, say that 3 times fast. Right. But I know. We'll put the notes on our show notes so you don't have to do any work. And of course, we cannot do this episode 2 without talking about the Australian zoos. First and foremost, Australia Zoo is just doing so much to help their wildlife. And it's important to know too, they're safe. They're not really near any of the bushfires. We'll talk more about too where these fires are located and get some maps up for you. But they have an amazing zoo hospital that services wildlife in need. And they recently serviced their 90,000th patient. 90,000th patient. And of course, Irwin kids, Bendy and Robert, are very, very proactive and posting and tweeting about the different rescue operations that they're undertaking. And so I highly recommend you follow some of their social media. But besides donating money to just the Australia Zoo in general, which of course is then putting it back into taking care of the wildlife and helping rescue them, there have been specific GoFundMe accounts. One Bendy just started called Water Stations for Wildlife on her Instagram page. That's awesome. It's getting critical water to the animals that are in this drought that have survived these bushfires. And there's also like a sister organization called Wildlife Warriors that are helping them get the proceeds for some of the wildlife hospitals and hopefully add on, because there's obviously a critical need for more care for some of these animal patients.
It's, the world's coming together for Australia, Angie. I mean, I really see what's going on. Like just reading today, Serena Williams donated her winnings from a tennis tournament in New Zealand, where I just was, Auckland, a couple weeks ago. And she, sent $43,000 or $45,000 or something to a relief fund. So we're going to post this in our show notes. Some of the organizations you can help donate to. Our Patreon supporters, we're voting right now on which organization to send money off to in Australia. Angie and I will probably throw some more money on top of that.
Yeah, just by listening to this podcast and following us on Patreon, supporting us there, money is going to animals in Australia, and
Right.
you'll be able to vote on what organization you would like us to support, because there are several good ones, of course.
Right. We're going to put that up this week. And then, there's like what Zoo Victoria, I've read, has done a ton of stuff. I mean, they're
Chris, they're on the ground. Yeah, they basically have a mobile hospital, and a team of veterinarians from Zoo Victoria is just at work saving koala lives, basically. And they have set up an emergency fund called Zoo Victoria Bushfire Emergency Fund, which can be found, of course, on their website. And so if you're in that region of Australia, you might want to support the Victoria Zoo. And of course, there's several zoos and aquariums that I'm not able to mention, but those are just two, of course, of the big dog ones. But you can find out more from the Zoo Aquarium Association of Australia Wildlife Conservation Fund, and we'll put that link in our show notes as well. And that'll have all of them listed on there if you have one. If you have an organization that you prefer, or a zoo that you prefer, but they're all doing good work. I mean,
well, they're doing, just to jump in real quick. I mean, some of the species I'm going to talk about here when we get to them, I'm sitting here thinking this animal might be extinct in the wild. I don't know if they have any of these species held under human care. I hope and pray that they do, because a couple of the species I'm going to talk about today, they could be gone in the wild after these fires. Like, they could be totally extinct in the wild, and hopefully the zoos there have them,
Yeah. Well, and you bring up such a huge, important point of why you and I are avid supporters of accredited zoos and aquarium throughout the world, because they act as an arc. And in a horrific situation like this, where wildlife numbers are undoubtedly going to decline dramatically, they have some populations that could be used in breeding programs to then help the population grow. So they just love wildlife too, and so they're just putting their life on the lines and doing this on a daily basis. And so it's a huge shout out.
Well, we have a huge interview next week, not to preface everything, but of how the LA Zoo is working with San Diego Zoo to save an amphibian species. And we'll talk more about that next week. But if it wasn't for their effort, this unknown frog would be extinct.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
What you're saying in Australia, these zoos are critical. They're critical to saving some of these species. So,
oh yes, I always think it's just amazing how many people don't realize how much conservation work accredited zoos and aquarium do to help save species. So kudos to all of you out there that we're not able to mention, but we'll try to get your name on our show notes or send us a message. Let us know, and we'd love to share it with our Instagram followers or Facebook followers. So, and lastly, for those of you sitting there like, I don't live near a zoo, or I'm not sure which organization to donate money to, or maybe you don't have the money to be able to donate, there is still a lot you can do. I think number one, and that's what this podcast is for, the best way to help is to just take a little time, listen to this podcast or do some research on your own, but just take a minute and learn a little bit more about what caused the Australian fires, and we'll help you navigate those muddy waters here throughout the podcast. Share this podcast, and just, we got to get people thinking and talking about this.
Right.
If people aren't pushing politicians to change their policies towards an improved environment and improved animal conservation, nothing's going to change. And that is a way that you can be a conservation hero with a click of a button without even, donating money.
Right.
And another thing you can do, if you're creative or you own a business or you work at a business, which probably that most people fall into one of those two categories, or you're a student somewhere, get creative, man. There is a lot you can do out there to help potentially to raise money or raise awareness about what's happening with the bushfires in Australia. For instance, I have a buddy in Brooklyn. Her name is Grace. Hi, Grace, if you're listening. I don't think she listens, but it doesn't matter because she's so awesome. She owns an athletic training gym called F45 Training at Borum Capitol Hill. Sorry, I'm not from the New York borough, so.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, they're all day today. They're doing a fundraiser where people from the community that are part of the gym that she works with and trains, and I'm following on Instagram, and they're raising like thousands of dollars.
Yeah, that's crazy.
For the Australian Red Cross. WIRES, we'll talk about that. That's WIRES, Australian Wildlife Rescue Today, and Australian WWF, World Wildlife Fund. So using her own talents of being an amazing and incredible motivating instructor, and her team around her and her colleagues, they're doing it. They're killing it. And you don't have to be a wildlife educator or a zookeeper or a animal conservationist to do these things. Super simple. And she set it up within like 1 or 2 days. So kudos to you, Grace. And other ideas you have about ways to fundraise just in your day-to-day life at your work or with your friends, on social media, let us know. We would love to support you in that process and learn about other creative ways that people are using their talents to help the animals.
No, Angie, that was good. Talking about what people are doing, I think, to kind of open up the podcast, let them know that there are people responding around the world to this emergency. And now I think, it's good to kind of jump into the data and talk about really what's going on. And, there's been a lot of truth and fiction, I think, in the media, so trying to find
I don't know about fiction. There's been a lot of numbers thrown around. Maybe.
There you go. Like, it's, in any of these emergencies, you have multiple media, reporting different things, I guess. And so the last few days, trying to dig through these articles and trying to find the truth of it. And, I just ask that people keep an open mind, with this data that we present, and just hopefully it makes them think, especially when we talk about climate change. The good news is the Australian government, I think just today I read that their prime minister came out and said, recognize that climate change is an issue for Australia, which is a big shift for him. Yes, I think
definitely.
Yeah, this was something that, needed to serve as a wake up call.
Our administration here in the U.S. is not doing. So kudos to Australia.
Yeah. I mean, the country could be burning down here, and our leaders here would probably still stick their heads in the sand. But, this isn't to be political. It's just presenting evidence in the data. So, if people haven't seen, and we'll obviously have these links up, I think this will be a very link heavy show notes for this.
That's a new term for All Creatures Podcast. A link heavy show notes.
I think it will be, because I really kind of dug down and tried to see where all these fires are. And the media has been throwing up a lot of maps, and I think they're very helpful to kind of show, where those fires are burning currently in Australia. For people that don't have a good grasp on geography of Australia, I'm just going to kind of quickly describe it. I know, God, we did this in a podcast, a year ago, but mainly where a lot of these fires are burning, that's a big concern, is in the east side of Australia. Okay. And that's where the heavy population is. That's the population centers of Sydney. Going north is Brisbane, then you go down to Sydney, and then you go all the way down South Victoria to Melbourne.
Right. And I always think of the East Coast because of the Great Barrier Reef, which you've been to.
Yes, I have dove the Great Barrier Reef.
That's incredible.
It's still there. So when you look at these fire maps, that is where the majority of them are. Now, there are other fires going on. In the north of Australia, there is. And then in Western Australia, around Perth, south of Perth, and then the southern portion of Western Australia, there are some fires going on there too. So it's not just the East Coast, but these horrific images that you're seeing are coming from the East Coast of Australia. Okay. And particularly the two areas that are really getting hammered really bad is New South Wales, which is Sydney area, and then down south to Victoria. Mm-hmm. Those are the two major areas where these fires are raging, really on the East Coast. Now, this is unprecedented. We've got some big data coming, but last summer, Angie, us and a lot of conservation organizations, we were upset because the Amazon was on fire, right? I mean, we were, it was disheartening what was going on in the Amazon. Yeah. So the Amazon was about 2.2 million acres were burning. Okay. Still a lot, still big, still big, but we were like, oh my goodness, the Amazon's on fire. What are we going to do? So conversely, we're upwards of, what did we say, 18 million acres?
Yeah, that's some of the most recent reports.
Right. And we said that was the size of West Virginia. It's bigger now. I went and looked, for people outside the United States, it's like 2 times the size of Belgium or the size of Austria. If you're looking at foreign countries, that is the amount that has burned so far and continues to burn. So it is dire. This is unprecedented. This is huge. This isn't just a bad fire season for Australia. This is history making. And unfortunately, leading up to it, last year, Australia experienced its hottest and driest year on record.
On record, okay. Right. That's just
on record. Right.
Crazy.
Ever since they started taking data, it has gone so crazy. So here on, I think it was the December 18th last year was the most extreme of the days. The average daytime temperature, maximum temperature across Australia was 40.9 degrees Celsius or 105.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That was that is the across the country. So, you hear in the United States, that's Seattle down to San Diego, across to Miami, all the way up to Boston. Can you imagine the whole country? The average high was 105 degrees.
No, I can't.
It was insane. And that was just last year. So if you look at the data in the last 100 years, 9 of the last 10 years, Australia have been the hottest in the last 100. So it's just getting hotter and hotter and hotter with no let up.
Right. And bushfires or grass fires in Australia are part of the landscape there.
Mm-hmm.
They've been around. They've been happening for forever. It's because it is hot there and can be dry there. But nothing this vast and this large has been seen. And of course, some of the fires are set naturally from what they're called dry lightning strikes, and then the fire jumping and things like that to other spots. Humans can be involved from sometimes an arson perspective or leaving their campfires, maybe to explain that a little bit better. So I've come across different articles saying, well, it's not necessarily climate change to blame, but the extreme nature of the fires, I think, is just the beginning of what we're going to see in years to come if we don't get this global climate change carbon emission crisis out of control. Or under control, excuse me.
Yeah, and it is politics. I mean, you have some of the and here in the United States, it'd be called the right-wing media saying, no, it's not climate change. They're trying to blame it on the arsonists. They're the ones doing the big problem. And that's why it was a big deal that the Prime Minister of Australia came out and recognized that, yeah, the climate is changing. The things that are hitting Australia right now, I mean, there's 2 factors. Their weather patterns are affected by 2 oceans. You have the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. So when there's an El Nino event, which is warm waters, that's when you get these drought conditions and you get higher than normal temperatures. Well, what's going on right now this year is in the Indian Ocean. They call it the Indian Ocean Dipole. That's actually where it's weird. The western portion, so nearest Africa, is hotter right now. Then there's a cooler portion of the ocean in the east. So what that's done has driven the rain away from Australia. So it's more, near Africa, it's wetter and it's a lot drier towards Australia. So that's kind of led to, so they get it from both ends, both oceans can affect their weather. This is what's crazy, Angie. This is what I think scientists are just kind of, their eyes are huge, is last October, really September, October, there was this thing called the sudden stratospheric warming event in Antarctica. This blew me away. I was like, what? First time I heard of it when I was kind of researching this in the climate in Australia. above the South Pole in the stratosphere, the temperature, so this is like 30 kilometers high in the air. It's way up there in the stratosphere. Normally it's minus 65 degrees Celsius. So that's the normal temperature up there. But they had this huge warming event where it went and dropped the temperature. Well, I say dropped, but it increased warmth to minus 5 degrees Celsius. So you had a totally...
That's 60 degrees difference.
Total shift in the stratosphere, 30 kilometers above the Antarctic.
Far away, yeah.
So this totally affected weather systems in the southern hemisphere. So you're setting up these conditions to this Indian dipole event to where now you have Australia, this total tinderbox, where it's extremely hot and extremely dry.
Well, and it's just, and I'm working with some of my students in my ecology class, and I keep trying to work with them on and talking about how everything is connected. Just like our last interview with Dr. Bathsheba DeMuth, we talked about the Arctic. We're on the other pole. That if you don't necessarily have interest in what's happening with the Arctic, whether the animals, the environment, the land, the people, you should care, because what's happening there is affecting our jet streams here in the US and our weather. And I think that's the thing too, is there's so many people being affected by this in Australia right now. Like in the moment, there's up to 27 deaths, 2,000 plus homes demolished. And and we're at the start. Yeah. So it's a crisis in Australia. Right. And for many of our other listeners that are not from Australia, who perhaps are still wondering how, besides, of course, the loss of animals, we're all here at this podcast listening, like, when are Angie and Chris going to get the animals? And I promise we're going to get there. We're going to get there. But why should someone in South America necessarily care what's happening in Australia? I'll tell you why. Because the smoke coming from these fires right now, according to NOAA, the smoke is circumnavigating the planet, and it's showing up over South America, being pushed there by the wind. So now thinking about wind currents. And everybody knows smoke in general is a health hazard. And that's going to be, of course, another repercussion we'll be talking about from the animal's perspective when we do get there. But the smoke has these fine particles in soot, which can be smaller than 2.5 micrometers, and they'll lodge into your lungs and potentially be passed into the bloodstream in South America.
Right. And that's, just think about the people in Australia, New Zealand, the islands, and now South America, the other side of the planet, or the Pacific Ocean.
So we're a global, our systems, our ecosystems, our water cycles, our biogeochemical cycles, our air cycles are so interconnected, and we don't necessarily see it on a daily basis, but it's happening. And so this is a big deal. Yeah.
This is the new norm. That's the thing. That's what they're saying. This is the new norm. Right. This isn't a once in 100 years or 1,000-year fire. This is the new norm for Australia. Their fires have been getting worse and worse leading up to this year. It doesn't mean next year there's going to be a bad fire. It's just you're going to see it more frequent than you normally would. Right. So in climate science, there's actually a field. It's called event attribution. It's like a new emerging field, because they're looking at these extreme shifts in the climate. And these, it's funny. Here in the United States, I forgot what it was a few years ago, it was snowing in DC. So he brought in a snowball to the Senate floor and said, "Look, there's no global warming. Look, I have a snowball." I forgot they called him Senator Snowball, and they were making fun of him because it's like, no, you don't get it.
He's trying to snowball the people.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, he totally misses the point. It's not
politicians are not scientists, and that's a different podcast for a different day. And he probably goes for you and I too when our little kids perhaps get a little bigger. But anybody and scientist out there should run for office, be it local, or at least get involved, for goodness sakes, whether you're on an advisory board or your local board, we definitely need more scientists and science and policy making, period. That's definitely for sure. Well, I think it's important to remember too, the way that John actually describes it this way, he read somewhere, with global climate change is whatever you are, whatever your climate that you live in your town or your state, whatever that is, it's just going to get more extreme. So if you're dry and hot, you're going to get more dry and hot. If you are cold and icy in winter storms, you're probably going to get, those are maybe not more of them, but they might be more, they might come harder and faster and have more of an impact.
Yeah.
And for us here in Florida, it'll be more heat and humidity and rain and mosquitoes.
Yeah, it's extreme. It's extreme. And I mean, this data, this is coming from NASA, the people that, also lost the podcast awards that we were up against NASA for the best podcast. But here's NASA, arguably, rocket scientists, the smartest people on earth. And, our current politicians are trying to muffle them a little bit, but they're still carrying on, and they're saying, current warming's roughly 10 times faster than the ice age recovery. After the last ice age, we're heating up quicker. Global temperatures have risen by 1.6 degrees Fahrenheit since the 19th century, the last 100 years. The more carbon we're dumping into the atmosphere, the more we're warming up. The oceans have really absorbed most of this heat. So they're saying the top 700 meters, or that's 2,300 feet, have warmed by 0.4 degrees Fahrenheit since 1969. This is data from NASA. This is, nonpartisan. They're just scientists reporting data. Now, here's the most nonpartisan organization that I used to, when I was in the Army way back when. You couldn't be political in the Army. You couldn't, because your presidents changed all the time. You just didn't really talk politics. We just didn't. It was something you didn't do.
You do your job.
Yeah, because it could be Bill Clinton, George Bush, whoever was your commander in chief. So you weren't political. The U.S. military, United States military, sees climate change as a threat to national security, and they're reluctant to get involved because of the politics, because money is influencing political opinion, but senior American officers, generals, admirals, these are the guys that sit around and think about this all day, the risks to our country here in the United States. They said it's already threatening the survival of poor, resource-deprived countries and is a huge risk to the wealthiest of nations. That here's a statement from 2015. Climate change is an urgent and growing threat to our national security, contributing to increased natural disasters, refugee flows, and conflicts over basic resources such as food and water. And they think it's only going to get worse.
Sure.
So the whole thing is climate change should not be a debate. Right, left, top, middle, whatever you are politically, we should all come together and say, this is something facing all of us. It affects all of us. Not if you're a Republican, Democrat, liberal, whatever political party you are in your country.
Yeah.
This is an issue that affects all of us. And here we have the fallout, in Australia.
Yeah. I mean, and the fallout of lives, human lives, animal lives, money, tons and tons of money. I mean, just the amount of money it takes to put out the fires and to rescue people and to rescue animals and to rehabilitate the land and rebuild. It's crazy. So in the years between 1967 and 2003, major Australian bushfires resulted in 8,000 injuries, 433 human fatalities, and cost approximately $4.7 billion.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of money. I mean, it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. Yeah.
And it's like we should invest in our future, green energy, reduce carbon emissions. In the long run, that will financially serve us better, Now, Angie, we can get off our high horses now about climate change. And I think that was just, we needed to set the conditions on why Australia is burning, and thank goodness the Prime Minister of Australia finally is feeling the pressure of the populace screaming at them that this is climate change. This isn't normal. We don't accept this. And so hopefully they'll make some changes, invest in the future, invest in a green economy, for their future, because we love Australia and it's wildlife, which is where we want to go. It's huge numbers we're seeing. So just last week, I was reading up to 500 million animals have died. That has now been updated to over 1 billion. And this is coming from Professor Christopher Dickman of the University of Sydney. And listening to Corbin Maxey had a special episode on last week, kind of understanding that the way they kind of came up with this number, because it's a huge number, is he did a census of animals like per square kilometer. And so he just looked at how much is burned and estimates, okay, this is about approximately how many animals have died in that 18 to 20 million acres that's been charred. So, up to 1 billion animals, 800 million to 1 billion is what he's predicting across Australia so far have died, have perished in these fires.
Yeah, I think the first article I read last week was 480 million, and I was just horrified.
Astonished. Yeah.
I mean, Australia, besides having just amazing people, they have a crazy amount of biodiversity and unique animal species that are found nowhere else on the world. I was trying to look up some of the numbers, and some estimates say that there's anywhere from 600 to 700,000 species. I think that's if you include insects. Depending on which data set you go with, mammal species potentially range anywhere around 380, some of those being about 22 of them being introduced, and over 550 species of land and aquatic birds, 680 species of reptiles, 190 species of frogs, and 2,000 species of marine and freshwater fish. And in that, some very, very unique species. Our marsupial families it's just incredible. The platypus, for goodness sakes. I mean,
I know. We're going to get there.
So it really just sent me, like I said at the beginning, opening of the podcast, kind of in this deep, dark place. And I got really emotional for a while. But as a trained scientist, I kind of, pulled myself up by the bootstraps, and I wanted to know how they're getting this number, because you helped train me and I'm a skeptic. I said, it can't be that number. That's just like, how do we know that? How do we know that? And so looking at the article and seeing how they did the population counts and really understanding that the data was taken from Dickman's study in 2007, basically the South Wales area. And then, of course, as a researcher, I understand how he extrapolated the numbers. And so that made sense to me. But then also starting to think about, okay, that's the animal density from 2007. It's probably changed somewhat, probably not for the better. It's probably lower. And of course, some animals can fly or flee or burrow, hide. So it's a pretty rough estimate, to say the least.
Right.
And so that made me sleep better that night. But then the next day I woke up and it was 500 million. And then the next day I woke up, they were like, well, that's only covering New South Wales. Now if we kind of extrapolate that data further into the Victoria area and other fires, now we're at this billion number. And then as of today, I even somewhere saw like 1.25 billion, depending on how of species of animals potentially killed by this fire.
It's devastating. It's
crazy. I mean, it's insane. And so, and now
we'll dig a little bit into some of the endangered species, because I'm afraid they got wiped out. Yeah.
And we don't really have time to get into all the details, because I did some of the dirty work for you, but there is a whole science out there called population ecology. Like, it's its own discipline. And people study this and how to have accurate population counts, and they're very, very good at it. And obviously Dickman is one of these scientists. But just like all good science, which means it should be critiqued and debated and explored and discussed, Professor Bradshaw at Flinders University in Adelaide thinks that that you probably shouldn't even share these numbers because they're not evidence-based of the current situation.
Right. He said,
right. Yeah.
He said it's inestimable.
Yeah. I was like, that's a mouthful. Inestimable. I don't even know. Yeah.
You can't estimate. He's like, you can't estimate this, but I think we have to, right?
Yeah. Or I understand like the media, and I do understand they have to be careful with numbers because people really tend to hone in on that, but we have to try somewhere. And towards the end of the podcast, we'll talk about what the future looks like. And one of the biggest things that needs to be done, well, there's several of them, but we need more research. And this is why science is so important.
Right.
And science in general is under attack here in the States. I'm not sure how it is in Australia with all of their funding, but definitely natural sciences, animal sciences, wildlife sciences, ecology. I don't think they get a ton of big funding. So hopefully this will bring some change to that so that we can understand more about these dynamics and how to help save our furry, feathery, scaly friends.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, it's complex. That's funny. It just brings me back to climate change because there is still a little debate in climate change, but not that it's real. It's more of like, what's the data really showing us? I think the debate in climate change is, okay, what's the projections?
Sure.
Because
and yeah, one of my dear friends, Taylor, she does modeling, and it is hard. You cannot always get all the variables right, but gosh darn it, you have to try.
Right.
I mean, we went to space on modeling, right? We landed on the moon based on modeling.
We did.
So, I mean, it's a way to get there. But it is an estimate. But regardless, the fact that a million is tagged at hundreds of millions or billions, that's tough.
Insane.
But a little ray of hope or something, because throughout my digging and doing research, trying to get a handle on this, there are definitely ways that animals can survive fires. A lot of them have great senses of smell. A lot of reptiles or lizards, they sense with their tongues. And experiments in Australia have shown that smoke will awaken Gould's long-eared bats and fat-tailed dunarts. Am I saying that right? Dunarts?
Dunarts, yeah. I think I've read about this.
Sorry, Australia listeners.
Yeah.
You can send me some emails about how to pronounce things better. But anyways, they can sense smoke that will help them escape fire. And of course, a lot of animals recognize a distinct sound. And so when the animals sense a sound, it's a distinct sound, they will flee. Studies have shown that reed frogs will flee towards cover, and eastern red bats will actually wake out of torpor, which is like their hibernation stage, just when researchers played the crackling sounds from a fire.
Right.
Because keep in mind, these species have evolved with fires as part of their ecosystem, but obviously nothing precedent like this, and historically maybe able to escape them. And just to show you how cool animals are, Chris and I don't talk about insects too much on the podcast because it's way, way out of our comfort zone.
Right.
But one study suggests that a certain species of beetles can detect a fire from 130 kilometers away.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's far.
So, but other than that, if they can't run or fly, a lot of animals will burrow. They've evolved to burrow as a way to hide from the fire in either tree hollows or underground. And they'll seek refuge in like crevices or and one of the last really big notorious fires in 2009 in Australia, they're called the Black Saturday fires. Mountain brush-tail possums would basically burrow into these crevices and tree hollows and did fine. So, I think it's
I mean, it's not the end of the world.
It's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah.
And of course, afterwards, on the positive side, we'll get to the negative side in a second, but on the positive side, species can repopulate with whatever survivors are around. And then some of them will even benefit from the new growth, or there are species that a lot of their reproduction actually depends on fires. And certain species like the fire beetles actually depend on fire for the reproduction. So they actually benefit from a fire, unlike obviously most species that don't benefit it.
Well, yeah, and I'm going to get there in a second because I think you're right. Fire is natural. Like, it's natural for things to burn. You need it. I think we've mentioned that in a podcast before. You need that undergrowth to burn, for certain seeds to germinate. It's a natural cycle. That's what we want. We want natural fires. I mean, because that's part of the ecosystem. Problem is, you get human intervention. I think that's some of the issues they might be having in Australia is, I've seen it in the news. Hey, we haven't been doing enough controlled fires. The problem with these fires, Angie, is they're so massive and they're so devastating and where they are. So, like, I did a lot of digging and looking at trying to pinpoint where these fires are and then look at what species live in these forests or these regions of Australia to kind of get an idea on what species might be affected. So when you're looking at New South Wales and Victoria and you look at these maps, it's horrific. I mean, these are all the national parks. Like, so if you go up to Brisbane, which is way up the coast, and then go all the way down to Canberra, which is the capital, and there's fires all down that east coast. So you're talking like 750, 800 miles or almost 1,200 kilometers of just burning. So that's like the whole coast of California on fire. Like, all of our woods and mountains just burning away. It's that devastating. So some of the national parks there, Wollumi, like Angie, I'm going to butcher some of these.
We apologize in advance.
Yes.
We'll put things up in our show notes that are spelled right.
Yeah. So the Alpine National Park in Victoria, there's fires burning. Then you go north towards Sydney. The one I really wanted to focus on, I mean, these fire maps are just, they're just devastating because the entire national park is burnt. The one I wanted to look at was the Blue Mountains. And, my good friend told me, she said, the Blue Mountains are gorgeous in Australia. And in 2000, they were listed as a World Heritage Site. So this is just south or kind of west of Sydney. And hopefully I get to go there one day once it's rehabilitated. Looking on the fire map, it's pretty much black. The whole thing's burnt. The whole national park is burnt. What makes me really sad is there's 400 different types of animals, mammals, birds that are there. So the ones I was looking at specifically, tiger quail, that was actually a species we were going to cover, but instead we're doing this whole thing. Yellow-bellied glider, koalas, green and golden bell frogs, blue mountain water skink, dingoes, kangaroos, bats, and birds. Whole bunch of different species there that live in this national forest. So, it's my thinking is not only, and this is what the population ecologists and conservationists are saying, not only have animals been killed or died in this fire, it's what happens after. Because
that is something that's obviously really hard to estimate.
Yeah.
The suffering impact and the loss, and people, of course, we've all seen the graphic pictures of people trying to save
kangaroos
koalas and wallabies.
Koalas, yeah.
And a lot of different zoos and other nonprofits are mobilizing to try to get in there and give these animals the medical support they need. And they're doing a great job of it. But how many are they not able to get to? And smoke damage, I mean, burns and smoke damage is really hard to bounce back from, let alone when you're in a charred area. Like, let's say you burrow into a tree or underground and you wait out the firestorm. And then what?
That's what I was saying. Like, so you create this starvation event. So, I'm saying look at it from the animal's perspective. So say you're an animal in the Blue Mountains. Pretty much the entire ecosystem has burnt to a crisp. Okay. You're a herbivore. You burrowed. You somehow survived. You come out. What are you going to eat? There's nothing left. And how long does it take with no rain? You're still in drought for new vegetation to come. So you're probably going to starve to death. Let's say I'm a tiger qual. I'm a carnivore. Okay. So I'm a carnivore. I emerge. Okay. There's some cooked animals I can eat. I can scavenge, if that's part of my diet, and I can, feed off some carcasses. A lot of animals have already died. A lot of my prey has died. So we already know, talking from our podcast, success rates of hunters, very low. Some less than 10%. I think it was tigers. It was like less than 10%, or it was the lion study that we looked at. So you already have a hard time catching prey. There's less prey. So you're probably going to starve to death. And so there's this huge fallout, and then they're like, oh, well, okay, it's nature. Nature comes in, burns, animals die, new animals will come in. That would be great under ideal conditions, but we know a lot of these animals are not under ideal conditions right now from around the planet. There's other pressures. Yes. So this is where, as a conservationist, we've got to look at the big picture and say, okay, yeah, it's big numbers. A lot of animals have died. The area is going to rehabilitate. The Blue Mountains are going to come back. They're going to green up in the next couple of years. Some animals will come back, but I guarantee you, from 3 months ago, you're going to go back. It's going to be silent. It's going to be like, I remember walking in New Zealand because it's just a different ecosystem. I remember telling you this or in a podcast. You walk in the forests of Florida and it's like, oh my God, it's just the buzz,
very
the
loud,
life. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's just crazy. You go in New Zealand because it's a different ecosystem, less insects, less birds, things like that. And it's deathly silent. Deathly silent. I guarantee you there's going to be a lot of places in Australia after this fire you go through, and even when the trees come back and some bushes come back, I guarantee it's going to be quiet for a long time, long time.
Well, it's tough. The highs and the lows of the news that's coming out of Australia it's definitely a roller coaster. And so I do think for all the bad things that are going on, then we'll get some rays of hope, like the Australian government coming out just today and saying, okay, this is a problem. I'm going to take steps. And the Prime Minister of Australia has already committed an extra $1.4 billion towards recovery effort. But a lot of organizations say that's nothing. And then it depends on, is that actually going to be prevention? And what about working towards becoming greener and reducing our carbon emissions? And so it's definitely not enough. And hopefully the people would keep pushing and demanding it, because that seems like, as you mentioned, they're being heard. So right. So that's positive. And then another positive story I just read that's actually circulating the news all over, because I think people are just looking for a glimmer of hope in this smoky fire, is that right now in New South Wales, the government is having planes drop thousands of kilograms of carrots, potatoes, I think grains, for starving animals. And it's called Operation Rock Wallaby. And it hopes to feed the starving animals, brush-tail, rock wallabies, and others, to help keep them alive, like you said, in this crazy devastation of a fire. And so that brings me hope. And I think that's maybe a quick fix, potentially. But once again, I don't know if there's a lot of science, and will this actually work? If so, how long do they do it? Then does the wildlife become dependent on it? I mean, I don't have any answers. I don't necessarily want to say that it's not a cure all. That's definitely a thing. It's better, I guess, than nothing, but we just don't, I don't know. It's
it's going to take, with the growth cycle of plants, and you need good rains, and it's going to take a while for that land to rehabilitate. And when you're talking 20 million, we're reaching 20 million acres, you're talking, tens of thousands of square kilometers.
I don't want to say that there's not enough carrots and potatoes in the world, but
There's not enough carrots and potatoes in the world to feed those animals for that long. Well, looking at specific species. So then I looked at the map, the burn map, and then I was like, okay. So I started looking at endangered species and tried to overlay it and see where they were. So, like the tiger quail is in deep trouble. Like that's one that's in that part. But here's some species that we haven't heard of before. So according to IUCN, Australia currently has 86 critically endangered species. Okay. So I'm thinking, okay, do these fires push any animals to extinction or at least extinct in the wild? So one of the things I looked at was leadbeater's possum, critically endangered. They figure there's about 2,500 left. They took a big hit in 2009, those fires you just mentioned. But the good news is they're located near Melbourne. So they appear to be safe, from what I could see. The plains wandered. It's a bird. Less than 1,000. Again, I looked where the range was with IUCN, overlaid at the fire map. They seem to be okay. North South Wales and Victoria, they're more in the western portion, which is good. Okay. This one, oh my God, Angie, this thing is the cutest thing on earth. The mountain pygmy possum. Critically endangered, less than 2,000, smack dab in the burn area. Smack dab. This is in I was going to try to say this, the Kozuzukiu National Park, KOSCIUSZKO National Park, the Alpine National Park that I just mentioned, smack dab right in the burn area. So theoretically, this is one that could burrow, I think, and wait out the fires. But here's a species I'll be curious to see what their status is in a year or two after this event. I think they just took a huge hit, if not, pushed into extinct in the wild. My hope is there's zoos or aquariums, Lee down in Sydney, let me know, or some of my friends down there, if you have some of these, under human care, because, that's a species that popped right up. I was like, wow. And I looked at their map and their range map, and it was right in the burn area. Bam. Smack dab.
Well, yeah, Chris, even to add to that, there's a little, I think it's in the rodent family. It might be a marsupial. I'm not sure because I had never heard of it before, because it was just recently described a few years ago on the border of New South Wales and Queensland. And it's called the black-tailed Antechinus.
Oh, geez.
I'm saying that wrong. Antechinus.
I thought it was this one that I had right here, but it's not. Oh my goodness. Okay, what's this one?
Yeah, it's the cutest little thing you've ever seen. It looks like a little rodent with almost like a shrew nose, and just literally described and found a few years ago, and it's right in harm's way. And of course, researchers don't know much about its ecology or population or breeding dynamics or social behavior, all the things that we typically do a whole podcast about. And there's a very good chance that most of the population could be wiped out. And it's yeah. So
well, let me add let me add that this was the one you were talking about. Looks like a shrew, but it's a marsupial. This is the long-footed potoroo. This is a small marsupial found in Southeast Australia. It's coastal border between New South Wales and Victoria. Smack dab and looking at their ranges in eastern Gippsland has been completely devastated by these fires. This is where these mega fires are. It was listed as vulnerable. There was maybe a few hundred left. They thought maybe up to 3,000. So here's another species that is isolated in that area that the fires just completely blew through their habitat. Yeah. And again, maybe one that might hang on, might not. Small marsupial.
Yeah, well, I just looked it up too. The black-tailed Antechinus is also a marsupial. So just a tiny with like a little cute little shrew nose. So, but I just recently described in 2014, found in 2014, gone in 2020. Like, that's a sad story if that's the story.
Yeah, that's. Let's continue.
I have some good news. Are we ready for some good news?
No, I'm still continuing.
Okay.
So,
geez.
well, I mean, this is just the tippy top. I mean, this is the tippy top. These are the species that, and I think it's not shock value. I don't want this to be shock value. I want this to be, okay,
numbers.
this is what happens when a population gets dangerously low. We talked about it in African penguins. We talk about it in all these other species. One event, like we go back to the Saiga, the Saiga, where in 2014, 200,000 died.
Yeah, yes.
In one epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, it's to get you motivated. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get people motivated to be active, to share knowledge, and to, try to help us and help the growing movement. There's tons of organizations out there working hard to do this. So let's spotted tiger quail. I just talked about them. Tiger quail, the spotted tiger quail, the spotted tail quail, the spotted tail dazure, or the tiger cat. Okay, so this is what they're all known as. It's a carnivore marsupial, and it's actually the largest last remaining carnivore marsupial on mainland Australia. Now we know offland Australia, our favorite Tassie Devils.
Yeah.
Tassie Devils. Okay.
That was probably one of your best animal sounds you've ever done, for the record.
I love that. I can win that one off. I can win the Tasmanian tiger off.
Your face is priceless too, because we're always FaceTiming and we're just basically having conversations during these podcasts. In case you couldn't tell,
right.
But yeah.
So their population estimate is about 14,000. Now they're not going to be pushed to extinction with these fires. There's Northeast Queensland. There is a population less than 1,000. They're fragmented, but they're hanging on. It's just their main populations in New South Wales and Victoria where these fires are raging. So I'm very concerned. They just took a huge hit. Now, the good news, we'll get to the good news, Ange, because we got to save that for the end to make everybody happy. But I did want to talk about more of the big species. Mm-hmm. The charismatic, the one that people are like, oh my goodness, because we keep seeing these pictures of burnt koalas. It just it breaks your heart.
Thirsty, yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we covered them in episode 93. Please go listen to it. You can listen to the San Diego Zoo koala keepers, their care for them. So Angie and I kind of talked about this. The population estimate of koalas is debatable, I guess. So the Australian Koala Foundation has a low estimate of less than 48,000. IUCN has an estimate up to 300,000. So they're probably somewhere in between there. Koala's main habitat, or where they're mainly, their population density, is the north coast of New South Wales. Mm-hmm. So that's why we're seeing a lot of these horrific koala photos or videos. And then the southeast corner of Queensland. Okay, so that's where their main population is. Now, there was something in the news. I know Jungle Jordan brought it up, I think, in his interview. We were talking about, are koalas functionally extinct? Most scientists say no, they're not. They're not functionally extinct, but they took a hit. They definitely took a hit.
Yes. Well, and I saw a projection of potentially 30% of the current population.
Right.
Which is a lot.
It is a lot. And
for one that's not doing that great to begin with.
No, and that's what I'm talking about. Like they got hammered. And so then Dr. Meltzer from the University of Queensland, he talked about the impact these fires have had on koalas so far. And he said, because the population estimates are kind of up in the air, we still don't know. He's like, it's hard to tell how hard they've been hit by these fires and the drought before the fires hit.
Right.
So he's saying, look at the habitat. And he says this event is not going to cause koalas to go to extinct. This specific fire will not. These fires will not. But it definitely is going to hurt them big time. And the last sad, how do I even want to go here? Because I do want to talk about like kangaroos and platypus, but kind of want to stay with koalas. An area that got just annihilated by these fires is Kangaroo Island.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you read about it. Okay, so Kangaroo Island, South Australia, it's a province. It's an island. It's on the, imagine Australia. There's an island just off the south coast called Kangaroo Island. Satellite images provided by NASA has shown about a third, a little bit over a third of the island has been scorched completely. And they estimated 25,000 koalas have died just on that island alone. 25,000. That is insane. Yeah, and that's from Flinders Chase National Park. That's half the population there on Kangaroo Island. This was a lightning strike fire, but again, they're suffering the drought. And so they have a lot of endangered animals on there. So this is one that I was like, okay, if I had to pick a species that probably got pushed into extinction or close to it due to these fires, just this one event is the Kangaroo Island Dunnart. You just said the Dunnart. And there was less than 500 left, critically endangered. I look at their habitat and where they're isolated, and the fire is just all throughout the area, all around it, and just devastated that part of the island. So this is a small marsupial, almost looks like a mouse. So maybe they could have survived the fire. I don't know. But with less than 500 left, I mean,
it's tough. And then let's say 50 of them survive, but they're isolated. They can't they're starving. They're in a charred area, and it's hard for them to find a breeding mate. If they do, then we talk about population genetic issues or with the bottleneck populations where they're not very big. So this is why, as Chris mentioned, when the numbers are this low to begin with, one event is just devastating.
Yeah, it just wipe out the whole population.
Yeah.
Now, some of the good news, some of the other species that you might be concerned with, kangaroos. And again, this week we're going to drop our Red Kangaroo podcast that we recorded for our Patreon only folks. We just felt compelled to release it to the general public. So we will do that. Overall, Angie and I talk about that. We talk about the different types of kangaroos. It's the massive family of wallabies, wallaroos, tree kangaroos, and the big kangaroos that you think of. Overall, populations are fine. Obviously, you've seen some horrific photos if you're paying attention to this stuff.
Right. Of kangaroos. There's some wallabies and wallaroos that aren't as...
No, right. But they're not in the fire zone, right? So the ones that are endangered, especially like tree kangaroos, they're not in that fire zone. So the ones that the eastern gray, the reds, the wallaroos generally are doing okay. You're talking their population in the millions.
Sure.
So they're going to do fine. Now, it doesn't mean a lot of them haven't died or
injured
suffered
and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they're doing okay. The other one, it's hard to quantify, is the platypus.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you just said, I just saw them at the San Diego Animal Park.
Congratulations to San Diego Zoo. Yes, they just started displaying. Is it a pair of them or
pair? Yeah, they have a pair. The only platypus outside of Australia. So I was super excited. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah,
we had fun. We totally had fun. Pip and I had a lot of fun at the animal park looking at them. They just it's a beautiful exhibit. Thank you, Rick Schwartz. Get down there and again and hopefully get a closer look at them. Now they're near threatened. Okay, so on Kangaroo Island too, they have a subpopulation of 110 individuals. Don't know how they're going to do. In New South Wales, Dickman, the scientist that we said, platypus have declined in all regions. So we don't know. In Victoria, not doing so well either. So they're in decline. They're going to suffer a hit. They do range up into Queensland. So we don't know where platypus is with these fires. This is an aquatic creature, but again, looking at food webs and what they eat, and, we covered them way back in episode 17, beautiful animal, but I think they're going to be okay. Like their population, they're not going extinct in this fire event. They're not, but they took a hit. I mean, they took a hit. So that's just what I looked at, in the last week when I was able to sit and start mapping and looking at species that might be affected. Those are the ones that jumped out at me.
Right.
Of course, you got the reptiles, amphibians, insects, plants, all affected by these fires.
Usually, yeah. And the fire is still burning. And so people are working their butts off night and day. I mean, heroic firefighters and volunteers. And I just can't even begin to imagine what it must be like. And those people are definitely heroes. And hopefully in some parts they're getting it under control, and hopefully we'll have good news to report in the weeks to come. Mm-hmm. But we are Australia. I'm acting like I'm from Australia now. No. But Australia is still weeks away from getting any rain historically. Mm-hmm. They're still in the midst of their summer or dry season.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's, you're reading just news today. These fires are merging. It's an inferno. They had some cooling, a little bit of rain, but not enough to quench anything. So, the world, like I said, we started off, the world's responding. Money is pouring in.
People are. I read a really cool article to all of our English fans, but two keepers from Longleat Safari Park in Wiltshire, England, are flying out to help their colleagues down south. Mm-hmm. And of course, the safari park in Wiltshire, England, is running a big fundraiser to raise proceeds that can be donated back to the animals in Australia. So the more you look around, I think there's a lot of people that, are willing to get on a plane, leave their families, pets, whatever, and go rush across the world to help. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we'll put a couple different websites out of what you can do to help as far as animal groups or people groups, or even volunteering. Of course, they really only want people that are trained in emergency response. But I will also say too, I'm sure there's a lot of organizations that, or ways to help that Chris and I are missing. Mm-hmm. So if you're thinking of donating to an organization, you can always just do your own background, do your own research, and check out Australian charities and nonprofits with the Charity Watch, which is a U.S. based charity watchdog that helps make sure that they're a good one. And we've definitely given a lot of good ones throughout the show, and we'll attach. And our buddy Corbin, he put together a wonderful link with a whole bunch of different animal groups that you can donate money to if you have interest. So there's just a lot of people. There's a lot of hope. I came across a story just the other day, and I'm going to get teared up. I don't know why, if I talk about it, but they're deploying dogs right now to help save koalas in the Australian wildfires. And I don't know why it makes me. It's
You're gonna make me cry.
I know. I don't know why. You can edit this part out, but there's something about animals helping animals, and that people are willing to train animals, and basically these dogs are trained to be able to sniff out koalas during the fires, and
you're making me tear up. I swear. You totally are.
But no, the gist of it's called Tate Animal Training Enterprises. They specialize in dogs that are trained, and they have a team of pups that have saved dozens of koalas. One dog, Taylor, has rescued 8 koalas since September, and they sniff out koala fur. And and when conditions are good, they can find them even if they're in trees or wherever. And I don't know why. There's people, it's such a clever way and a smart way to find a solution to some of these problems, and that people are willing to do this. And then of course, animals are just amazing dogs who can do it. And then after I wiped my tears away, I think it was just my breaking point, and this was like a ray of hope, and they're like happy tears. But that the trainers use the command "koala find," I love that. So
I'm going to start bawling here too.
I know. I usually don't cry about people. It's like animals and then animals helping animals. I'm like, oh my gosh, get me a Kleenex, John.
And I've seen tons of videos of people like the one of like, it makes me want to cry, is like 10 koalas in a car. This woman, look when she started. She went out there and just grabbed them and threw them in her car,
Yeah. People are amazing. And the things people will do not only to help other people that are struggling and suffering.
This is something new for us, Angie. We've never cried on a podcast. As horrific as a lot of this stuff is, this one's tough. It's tough.
It really is. And
really
you do,
tough.
and you feel helpless. And that's why you inspired me to look through the data, which did definitely cause some tears, but to move past it and to share it and to get people, like you said, get people motivated to do something, do anything.
Yeah.
Click, share this episode, share Corbin's list of organizations, whatever it is. Go to your zoo that day and support whatever they're doing. There's so many ways that you can help now. Vote with your dollar. Chris and I always talk about that in the podcast, but we need to come together. And there's so many. We've always talked and promoted a lot of our conservation heroes, as far as all the organizations that we've worked with, all the interviews that we've done. Our listeners are just amazing. The emails of support we get and information. Check this out, Angie. Check this out, Chris. Here's the link you should read about. It's just been really incredible. And I think together it just goes to show, with support, we just got to keep fighting the good fight. And there's a woman, we don't know her name, that put 10 koalas in her car, because that's just what you do.
Oh, that one. I don't know why that one just turns on the waterworks. I just see there's a lot of good in the world, and I don't think we tell enough of the stories. And I'm glad we started out with the positive stuff that was going on. And
I think we'll hear more. I mean, that's where our listeners, if you hear about amazing fundraisers or great ideas or creative ways to get your work or your school involved, let us know. We can even do an extra conservation news or news of what's happening out there to get people motivated, because it is kind of contagious when you hear like, oh, Grace did that at her gym. I can do that.
Yeah.
I can do that. And that's the thing, is it's just, it gets the wheels in motion, and it helps all this ugly stuff. It helps you move through it, because like I said, earlier this past week, when I just wanted to sit around and cry about it or not think about it. Right. I was just like, well, it's not here. I just can't worry about it. Feeling helpless is a horrible feeling, but the more we dug down deep, and the more Chris and I worked together, of course, we're each other's support system as well. Here we are. And did we do a great job of covering the Australian bushfires of 2020? Probably not. You wasted another good hour of your life. I stole that from Car Talk. Truth be told, but no, I think that the biggest thing is moving forward.
Right. And
that's what we need to do. And that's what we need to vote with our dollar and get policymakers paying attention. And from a scientific point of view, because that's what Chris and I are, more research is needed. Even Professor Dickman is basically saying, he's the ecologist out of Australia. Professor Dickman was describing that in Australia, that a lot of times policy is just frozen because of not wanting to utilize science, or if there's a debate in science, and they just have to get proper environmental friendly policies on board to help the environment, to help the animals, to help the people of their own country, and then to help people throughout the world, in South America, that could potentially be affected by smoke. And then, but it isn't just Australia. We need to get our policymakers to listen to environmentally friendly, animal conservation friendly, water friendly, environment friendly, forest friendly policies here in the United States, because we're supposed to be the leader in the world, or what everybody quote unquote looks up to. And we are not.
No.
Not even close.
No, and I know, compose myself. The people of Australia care a lot. They care a lot, and you see it, you read it, you hear it. They care about their wildlife,
and they
care about they are tough. The Aussies are the best. I love my Aussies. Absolutely love them. And there are a lot of good people out there fighting, a lot of good. And like we said, opened it up. Serena Williams donated $43,000 today to the effort. Not just celebrities, but you, the listeners, are donating money. Our people care. There's a lot of good in the world. This is just what motivates Angie and I. This was a tough one to do. It was tough to look at these small populations and then all of a sudden I have an aha moment and go, oh my God, that animal might have just went extinct. And my heart breaks. It breaks. But there's a lot of people out there fighting global wildlife conservation. Love them. We're going to have them on soon. What they're doing, World Wildlife Fund, what they're doing. All the zoos and aquariums around the world are banding together, and we're with you, Australia. We're with you. So there's a lot of good out there that hopefully comes from this horrific fire season for you.
Yeah. And we'll put all of our show notes up as, what did you call this episode earlier? It was kind of funny.
It's a lot of links. It's a lot of links.
Populated density of links or something.
Links, yeah. There'll be a lot of links.
Just to mention some of the different groups that we mentioned, we'll put some of the lists up on the show notes to help you navigate the different groups. We have Corbin Max's list that suggests Aussie Ark, WIRE's Australian Wildlife Rescue Group, the Koala Hospital, of course. There is Australia Zoo and Zoo Victoria, and then several others that we've mentioned throughout the podcast. So thank you so much for listening and for caring. If you listen to this podcast all the way through, God bless you.
Yeah.
And but it means that you care enough, and you should share this and let people know how they can help. And if you have an animal dork friend like Chris and I, that's how a lot of this started out. Mm-hmm. Maybe you can brainstorm some clever ways to help and raise funds. Maybe it's a 5K. Maybe it's shaving your head. I don't know. There's definitely a lot of creative ways out there to get people motivated, and I definitely think there's a huge reason to help. Everybody loves Australia. Yeah, they're just a hot spot for biodiversity. The people are amazing. It's just an awesome country, and they need our help right now.
Yeah, they're one of my favorites by far. And I love covering animals from there, and we're going to continue to cover animals from there. And we thank you so much, and we'll be back next week. I mean, look for the red kangaroo episode. That was a fun one that we did.
Yeah, I got to work with kangaroos, so I think I'll probably tell some funny stories.
Yeah, it's a good one. And next week we'll be back with another new species. This week's Australia week, and we're going to go and cover amphibians. So we will see you then.
Thank you.
Listen, learn, share. Join the movement at allcreaturespod.com.